Surprise, everyone. Welcome to the Speeding in the Pits podcast. My name is Connor Huberty. I am your one and only host this week for this week's episode. My partner in crime, Wyatt, he is out last minute dealing with some family stuff. I think all is well. It's positive family stuff, but just wasn't able to make it this week. So I'm going to give it we'll see if it's a good attempt at a solo podcast here. I've heard in the podcast world, this is one of the hardest things to do. Um, should also correct before we get too far into this. The show isn't technically really a podcast, so thank you for tuning into our video episode of Speeding in the Pits here. I know we say that just about every week, and I do it all the time anyway. But technically not a podcast yet. We are still working on that. Anyway, thank you for being with us this week. I think this is episode 15 of Speeding in the Pits, and want to say it, and I'll say it at the end. But very thankful for all of you tuning in every week. This is a lot of fun for us. Anyway, let's get right into it. NASCAR last week here was at COTA, the first road course race of the year for NASCAR at a new Circuit of the Americas layout. They changed it from the Formula One circuit. Those of you that are pretty general fans probably didn't even notice the difference. You probably actually enjoyed it more. Wyatt did ask that I save some of COTA for next week when he returns to the show. So we won't get too far into it, but I know he'll have some thoughts about this. But Ross Chastain, if you did see the race last weekend, decided to turn back into old Ross a little bit on lap one. Went ahead, turn one, dive bombed the field from about 5 rows back, and absolutely cleaned out Chase Elliott on the initial start of the race, which those of you watching that maybe were just seeing that as any other ordinary wreck, that's not something that should be happening at a road course. It's not something that should be happening anywhere. Lap one of the race, typically pretty clean, orderly start. I'm not quite sure what Ross was doing there. He looked like any of us trying to play a video game or on iRacing trying to pass 10 cars in one lap. It never works. So that was the exact result that Ross should have expected. I'm not really sure what else he was doing or thinking there. The thing I'll say about it, and the movie made, I liked Ross a couple years ago when he was kind of the wild and crazy Ross Chastain, wrecking guys, just driving through people a little bit. Had a couple scuffles with Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin. I think most that was the 2022, 23 seasons. What I liked about it is he wasn't afraid to say something about it after the race and just kind of unapologetically explain that that's just the way he was. That's how he races, and that's just how it's going to be. Well, if you follow along with that saga from a couple years ago, Rick Hendrick, the guy that Chase Elliott drives for, and Kyle Larson came out and said some things in the media that almost kind of seemed threatening to Ross Chastain's job, as Ross also drives a Chevy. So there's an alliance there between Trackhouse and Hendrick and all the other Chevy teams that they all do kind of work together based on manufacturer. So Mr. Hendrick came out and said some not so nice things. And like I said, you could kind of almost perceive it as a threat that Ross would lose his job if he continued to wreck Mr. Hendrick's race cars. So Ross really toned her back for the 2024 season. We really didn't see a lot of the same things that we saw this weekend. And this was almost more of a mistake. So you could maybe classify it a little bit differently. But what I liked about Ross then, like I said, is he spoke up and defended himself, or at least had a little bit of a logic or reasoning as to why he'd do something where after the race this weekend, he wasn't in the care center at any point, but he got interviewed after the race and basically just said along the lines like, I had no comment or declined to comment on the incident with Chase. And that does bother me because, like I said, even if that wasn't something where old Ross was trying to be aggressive and make a move early in a race, at the very least, it's a mistake, and he should be someone that actually, kind of speaks up for that and admits that mistake and tries to correct that in the future and apologize. I know it's like the soft answer, and people don't like to hear that, but at least say something. No comment is just not going to solve any problems. So I don't know quite what Ross is thinking. Chase, obviously, I think still owes him one in my book. Do we see it this weekend at Phoenix? Probably a good place to do it. Chase has got a history of doing that before, a la Denny Hamlin in 2017. So I'd look for some fireworks. We'll talk more about Phoenix later. But yeah, just again, kind of a weird weekend from Ross Chastain. Just either be the aggressive Ross or come out and apologize for it. But saying nothing is just almost really confusing at the end of the day. Overall about COTA, I thought it was a good race. So I really do, I on this show, every single episode, I feel like we somehow come back to a conversation about the next gen where uh, I have some sort of complaint about it. But genuinely, I really didn't this week. I thought I put on a good race. Applaud NASCAR for the tire. Try not to get too far into this to save Wyatt some conversation. But um, again, a lot to build off. I like the new layout. I say we keep it that way. I don't think COTA should come off the schedule. I think it's a road course that NASCAR should have a presence at. Um, and yeah, overall, a good weekend. I thought the Xfinity race was fun. Glad to see Zilich get one there. Bummed about how his cup race went, just getting caught up in things that he had nothing to do with, unfortunately. So fun to see him get put in the back and pass some race cars, but would have liked to see him in there at the end contending for the win. But definitely not the last time we'll see Connor Zilich. I know I was on here last week saying it's maybe a little too early to be thinking about his cup career, but at the same time, not a bad time to get him some exposure. So especially at a road course like that, just get him into some cup races, get him racing around the cup regulars. I don't think there's any harm in that, but I do still think full time for him next year in the Xfinity Series is the right move. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. I could see that 99 car, coincidentally, the one he ran into on Sunday, opening up for him. I would have to go back and look at Suarez's contract there too, but um, I digress. I'm sure we'll talk more about Connor Zilich in the future, but overall, good weekend at COTA. I think a lot to build off for NASCAR there. But yeah, I'll save the rest of that conversation for Wyatt when we get back next week. Uh, so this episode will be shorter. I'm not saying it's over now, but a few topics to cover. I don't expect this to be longer than like 40 minutes as I'm talking in my old teacher voice, but there is quite a bit of news this week. So we felt like we needed to have somebody come out here and speak on some of this. During the race on Sunday, speaking of, Austin Cindric actually right hooked Ty Dillon. And if you watch a TV broadcast, they didn't do a great job of getting into depth on that. I think they showed one replay and that was about it. But Austin Cindric intentionally wrecked Ty Dillon on Sunday, coming down the front stretch at COTA. NASCAR announced today that he was docked 50 points and fined $50,000 for that move. And that is pretty significant. So those of you, again, that are just kind of getting into racing or following along here for the first time and maybe just getting familiar with the sport, we call it in racing, anytime you right rear somebody, it quite literally means anytime you take your car and drive into the right rear side of an opposing car and spin them out, that's a big no-no. And again, that's called right rearing someone. So that's what Austin did to Ty Dillon this weekend. And Austin, you do that as a retaliation or some sort of, payback. Austin didn't like the way he was being raced by Ty, got ran off on a couple corners, it sounds like, beforehand. I didn't see any clips of that TV broadcast. Obviously didn't show us a whole lot, but at the end of the day, the right rear is the move of note. We've seen it quite a few times, unfortunately, here in the last couple of years. I want to get out in front of it and say I think it's dumb. I really don't think it ever really solves anything. There's plenty of ways to wreck a guy otherwise, and why we don't like right rears is it's very dangerous. It's just not. It's not needed. You know what I mean? Like there's plenty of ways to get payback on a guy or run somebody hard and ruin their day or ruin a stage even for them to get payback. That isn't involving right rearing and opening that whole can of worms where some pretty big examples we've seen over the last couple of years. Austin Dillon at Richmond right reared Denny, Chase right reared. I think it was also Denny. I think if I go back and at Charlotte, I'm pretty sure when Chase got suspended, Bubba right reared Kyle Larson at Vegas. I'm sure I'm missing other ones too. I think Cindric actually right reared Austin Dillon. This is all in the last couple of years. There's plenty of examples. So most of the time when that happens, NASCAR does issue at least a one race suspension to the driver for right rearing someone else, just again, because of the safety factor and all the issues surrounding that. And so NASCAR came out today and Austin Cindric was docked 50 points and then the monetary fine, which, I mean, whatever. Well, that's kind of a side piece to all this, but competitively docked 50 points. And it is pretty significant. It is a significant amount of points. He dropped all the way down to 35th. So pretty much puts him in a position where you're going to have to win a race here before the playoffs to make the playoffs, where he was actually having a really good start to the year. I mean, besides COTA, that wasn't really the trend, kind of stopped there after Daytona and Atlanta, but he was off to a pretty solid start. There was nothing to be ashamed of, and actually sitting in a pretty good spot where if 16 guys don't win races this year, he could have probably pointed his way in without winning a race to the playoffs. And it's just kind of nice to always have that luxury, right? So drivers don't have to rely on it. But unfortunately, in this case, I don't think he's getting that back. Climbing back from 35th at this point, just not really feasible. That's pretty tough. I mean, I was just sitting here telling Wyatt about Briscoe and everything else last week that his penalty, and we'll talk about him in a second, but his penalty, he could still maybe be okay. But just looking at trends, I don't know, 19 car versus the 2 car. I'd probably rather have the 19, but I could be wrong. And I guess in this case, Austin Cindric too can make me eat my words, but is not a comfortable spot being in 35th. So, and not suspended either. So he'll be racing next weekend at Phoenix. And that is a pretty popular conversation, we'll call it, pretty spirited debate online right now in the NASCAR circle as to why Austin wasn't suspended for a race. And NASCAR came out with the announcement and said that they felt because it was at a road course and the speeds were lower, that there wasn't as much danger to the move Austin made with Ty here this week versus some of the other ones I mentioned where Bubba's got suspended, Chase. I think there's others I'm forgetting. But my take on that, I really do disagree with NASCAR pretty wholeheartedly on this, to be honest with you. I think there just needs to be consistency. We talk all the time on this show about cautions or other calls that NASCAR makes, that we just need to be consistent. And I really do think right rearing should just be this. I guess it doesn't even need to be a suspension, but if you're going to give suspensions at all for right rearing somebody, then they should all be, I think, is my train of thought. I just don't want a world like this where now, one is okay, but not another. So now, does that mean we go to any track that's a slower racetrack, Martinsville, another road course, North Wilkesboro, anything like that? Are we just opening the door where, hey, if you need to pay back a guy from earlier in the season, just save it for one of these tracks and you can just right rear the crap out of them, I hope that's not the case. I hope we're not seeing just absolute wreck fests out here because of that. But I don't know, man. I just hate it. Like, again, just put the cautions to go back to it. If it's a caution on lap 1, it's a caution on the last lap of the race. If right rearing somebody at Daytona is a suspension, right rearing somebody at COTA is a suspension, just based off the fact that we got to be consistent and that you got to hold everybody to a standard, I think. And like I said, if we don't want to be suspending guys for it, then take them all away. But it just can't be. I'm just really sick of every week there just being judgment calls on some of the simple stuff that keeps coming up. And unfortunately, right rearing has become something I consider a quote unquote simple thing because it's become such commonplace for guys here since really like 2022. I feel like it's been happening even more, but I don't know. I just don't quite get the NASCAR world that we want to take each individual call, sit on it for 3 days, and then give a different result or a different punishment or a different penalty or anything like that. Like, I just don't know why we want to keep doing that to ourselves, because the more you keep opening the door for judgment, the more controversy you have and the more questioning you have as to why there's inconsistency and why there's penalties or there's not penalties or there's suspensions and then there's not suspensions. It just doesn't make sense. I hate it. I really wish we lived in a world where the sport was more black and white. Sometimes this being one of those things, cautions being another. I think that's the direction the sport needs to get to, because as a viewer, it is kind of important to know, like, in the moment when you're watching something, like, oh, hey, there's that. Or like, compared to a stick and ball sport, when you're watching football and you see holding, like, I know it gets missed sometimes, but a real egregious call and holding happens on every play, you have a pretty good idea of saying, like, oh, there's a really bad one, they're going to call it. And sure enough, the flag comes flying. It's balls and strikes, whatever else you want to call it. That's pretty simple in sports. We got to have those simple calls. And right now, NASCAR doesn't have it. And honestly, I hate to say it, they do a lot of it to themselves by just sitting on it and making decisions. And a lot of the decisions just don't always match up 100%. Like, one day it's this versus another day it's a different answer. And that's frustrating as a fan. I think NASCAR needs to hear that we as fans, and whether you're a casual fan that's only watched one race or you've been watching them every week for decades, like you want to know what the rules are. You want to be immersed in the sport completely. You want to understand what you're seeing on TV at all times. And so the harder you make that to be possible, the less appealing your sport is. And so I just I don't get it, to be honest. So hopefully we find some direction on right rearing. Hopefully we don't see a whole bunch of them here, but I don't know. Again, you just open Pandora's box when you make a call like that. But speaking of penalties, Austin Cindric was handed a pretty massive one. But Chase Briscoe, we didn't really talk about this when it came up. Just didn't fit in our show the week it was issued. After the Daytona 500, Chase Briscoe was docked 100 points. If you follow the sport, you probably heard it from somewhere else already by now. But NASCAR actually came out today, so Chase Briscoe and his team appealed that penalty right away, which Austin Cindric, this appealing penalties happens in inspection a lot of times. If a car was found to not be the right height or weight or something like that, the team will appeal to NASCAR and kind of plead their case as to why something was defective or whatever. So that's what Chase Briscoe's team did. Austin Cindric, there's video evidence of him spinning a guy out. He won't be able to appeal. Might, but won't do anything. Anyway, Chase Briscoe got his penalty overturned from a couple weeks ago at the Daytona 500. Now, instead of 50 points, Chase's penalty was 100. And I don't remember the monetary value. I think it was even worse. But anyway, Chase got all 100 of those points back. So 100 points, if 50 is bad, 100's obviously much, much worse. And so Chase went from well below 40th in points, I guess, technically, wherever that would put him. There's guys that don't even race every week, like Martin Truex Jr., who scored 1 point for starting the Daytona 500. Chase was very much behind him in points. He was actually still negative. So he got a plus 100 added to his score today. Looking at the point standings, he now has 72 points and is in 15th. So massive bump. He was negative, obviously. Now, if you want to do that math at home, that's still minus 28 points after COTA. So quite a big hole to climb out of for at least another week. You'd be below zero. And so definitely somebody like Austin would have been a win. You have to win to get into the playoff situation. Now 15th in points. He's right back in the sweet spot. Obviously, Chase has higher aspirations than that to go on and win races this year. I really do think that 19 car and Toyota in general is going to find some things here. Christopher Bell's obviously doing that already, but I just think Joe Gibbs as a whole really going to find some speed. Do I expect Chase to come out and win 3+ races? No, probably not. But could I see him winning 1, maybe 2? He's really good at Darlington, a couple other places. Yeah, he's going to contend. He's going to be relevant. Best car he's had as a Cup Series driver. I was going to say arguably best car he's ever had in his NASCAR career, but that Xfinity car, the 00 for Stewart-Haas back in the day, that thing was a rocket. So maybe not the best car he's ever had, but definitely the best Cup car at this level that he's ever driven. I got a lot of high hopes for him. I like Chase a lot. I think he's got a lot of potential. Just again, kind of came into what you call a lame duck situation at Stewart-Haas. They were kind of on their way out of the sport. His last couple of years as a Cup driver needed a new home, and Joe Gibbs Racing obviously as good as it gets here. So a little bit of a momentum boost, hopefully for him, getting some points back. Phoenix is a track he's won at before. I would look for him to have a great weekend, just a little bit more wind in his sails here and relevant in the point standings again. So yeah. Again, if you're listening to the show every week and didn't hear us talk about the penalty, sorry we missed it the first time, but full circle moment. The racing gods wanted us covered there, and it gave us a break, and they overturned one. But I don't even remember what the penalty was for. It was during qualifying. So when he put the car on the pole, there was something with ride heights or something like that they found wrong. And I think I could be dead wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Anyway, they went ahead, overturned that, found whatever it was a fluke situation, not the team's fault. They weren't intentionally doing anything wrong, and we're right back in the mix. Anyway, beyond, I guess, driver penalties, there is an ongoing saga that we're probably going to talk about pretty much to the point where we're all getting bored to death. But this is the lawsuit from 23-11 Front Row Motorsports against NASCAR regarding the charter agreement that NASCAR tried to sign last year and tried to get the teams to sign. Where we're at with that, we won't see the trial until December. So again, the official decision, if we make it to trial, long ways out. But NASCAR issued what was called a counterclaim today. I'm not a legal expert by any means, so don't expect me to nail this. But to kind of sum it up, NASCAR is saying that the counterclaim is levied mostly against Curtis Polk, who is one of the owners of 2311. I actually think he might be the majority, if I'm not mistaken, but a pretty prominent figure. Curtis Polk in NASCAR right now is an owner of 2311. NASCAR is alleging that he was violating anti-competition rules, things like that, by trying to orchestrate like a boycott or something like that of signing the agreement. Well, obviously there wasn't really much of a boycott at any point, but um, it sounds like where this comes from is NASCAR. Typically, I guess, from what I've read, again, not a legal expert, but as I've been digging through it, it's pretty common for something like this to get filed in a suit case like this. So, um, what is it going to mean? I don't think a whole lot. Um, in the grand scheme of this case, it's probably just a matter of trying to stir up some counter arguments, trying to get a little bit more wind behind NASCAR's legal sails, for lack of a better term. Again, I don't think it changes a whole lot. It's just literally more legal back and forth at this point. NASCAR has come out and said that whether this quote was from current this week or from months ago when this lawsuit started, but NASCAR has come out and said that the charter agreements are not something they need in the sport, but they feel like they are equitable and fair agreements for their teams and their owners. And I guess that's the part I want to hit on the most is this whole charter thing altogether. Sorry, this podcast is getting into the weeds here. We not a lot of racing exactly on the track, but off the track, plenty to talk about, unfortunately, again this week. But uh, where my head's at with this charter agreement, and I guess at this point, I hope NASCAR is kind of on the same page, is that these charters, yes, NASCAR is saying that they might not be necessary or they might not need them in the sport. And literally for those of you that are new to the sport, again, I want to say, what was it, 2016, 2017, 2018, somewhere in there, 2019 even. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a break. I don't remember how long ago this started, but within the last decade, NASCAR came out with these charter agreements. And what the charters are supposed to do is create security for team owners that want to be a part of the sport. Basically, there's 36 charters. The way you can look at it is if there's 36 charters in NASCAR, there's 32 teams in the NFL. Basically the same thing. You could call it a franchise, whatever the case may be. Any team can only own up to 4 of them, though, is the rule. So if you want to run a 5th car, it's got to be under the table. It happens all the time. Like the junior motorsports thing had some Hendrick backing. Technically not a 5th Hendrick car, had Hendrick support. It goes on and on. There's plenty of that goes on when you see non-chartered cars racing. There's usually like a satellite of another team. Anyway, where we're at with this, these 36 charters are our 36 teams in NASCAR, and then you can run one-offs like you see. Like the Daytona 500 has 40 cars start because 4 people decide to buy a car, and or they can have multiple, I guess, but at least 4 people have a car. They bring it to the track. They have to qualify their way in, like you saw in Daytona. If there's more than 40, but only 40 cars can start the race. But those 4, you don't get guaranteed starting. Your purse money you win isn't nearly as big. The financial incentives of running without a charter are non-existent. There really is no massive benefit to being a full-time cup team and running without a charter. So essentially, if you're going to run the full season, you need the charter. You need a charter to field a car, and that guarantees you a starting spot in all 36 races. Like I said, your purse money is much better. That's the money you win every race, depending on your finishing spot. You get paid for finishing last in the sport. It is a thing. It does matter. It needs to be there. So I don't mind the charter. I understand where NASCAR is coming from, but because the sport didn't have charters for forever. I mean, we've only had them for a decade, and sport's been around 77 years now. Like they made it just fine without it originally. But anyway, where we're at now, I feel like the charters are kind of the cat's out of the bag situation where we can't go back to not having them anymore. Teams are spending millions. These things started out as costing, I want to say a price on a charter initially was maybe a couple million, something like that to guarantee that starting spot. And in less than a decade, I want to say that the rumors were out that a charter this offseason, if you wanted one when Stuart Haas was closing up, things like that, teams come and go and sell them off. Charters were worth 35 to $40 million a piece. So, I mean, in just a decade, I don't even know the percentage on that, but it's a massive return on investment. If you bought one initially and you sold it this year, like you made $25 million probably just on the charter. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into racing besides that. But what I'm saying is NASCAR can't just say, in my opinion, again, not a legal expert. I don't know how this court case is going to go. This is not a prediction on that either, but just my 2 cents is we can't get rid of the charters. The charters have to be here forever. There really is no way to get rid of them anymore with the teams and all the value they've invested here to have these. You can't just make them go away unless NASCAR is going to somehow give financial incentive to the teams and buy back the charters and then disband it. I don't know how that works either. So don't ask me if that's possible. But anyway, you just can't do that because if you're going to tell somebody like Rick Hendrick, who has 4 of these charters, committed to it right away, has been a part of it every step of the process. If you're going to tell Trackhouse, who got late in the game or is a part of the sport now later in the game, just bought a 3rd charter this year. So they paid a higher price than their first couple they bought. You're going to tell a team like that, like, hey, thanks for contributing a lot of money and effort to being a part of our sport and really dedicating yourself to this, but your financial investment, we just took most of it away. Your return you're going to get someday for being in the sport for decades, we're just getting rid of it. So you can't do that because you're going to lose owners. I think honestly, from a PR standpoint, if NASCAR comes out and reverses a rule like that or takes something like that away, there's absolutely no way that you're going to try to that can't be good for attracting new ownership. If people leave the sport, who's coming in to fill your spot? Like, that's not an appealing world to live in if you're a team owner or you want to be a part of the sport. You don't want NASCAR to be your boss at that point. But I don't know where NASCAR would expect that to go, to be honest. I think there's revenue sharing in this case that is going to come up. It's dollars and cents at the end of the day, and teams feel like they just aren't getting the value out of their charters that they deserve. And I think a lot of it's probably they probably have an argument anyway, I would say, in a lot of places. I don't know the details. I don't know the numbers. Just looking at the structure of it, it just feels like, teams right now are below, that's right around 40% of the revenue share. It's reported this new charter agreement from last year was going to put them at 49%. I don't know how other major sports are run. NASCAR is not exactly comparable because they do own a lot of the racetracks and have to fund a lot of that. And they do a lot of the entertainment side, the venues, the production. A lot of that does come out of their pockets. And I know other sports do some of that too, but they're not built. The NFL's not building all the stadiums. They're not, I guess maybe they're as involved with officiating and things like that. I shouldn't speak too far to that. I just know NASCAR's, it's serious. You got tech, you got officials everywhere, that whole thing. I think NASCAR does spend a lot. Should it be 51% of the revenue of the sport? I don't know about that. I don't really know, again, what's worth it and what's not at this point, where they should be cutting money or not. I don't know if that's feasible either. But anyway, to sum it all up, I just think that the teams need value from the charters. The charters need to stick around forever and be guaranteed forever, where right now we're just signing these 7-year agreements and 7-year extensions and kicking the can down the road, but not giving that guarantee. I really do think the sport explodes a little bit in terms of value if these charters do get deemed permanent or are ruled permanent. And again, you just can't take them away. You can't make this money just vanish out of thin air and take all these spots away from people and everything else that has to do with the day-to-day of owning a race team. It's not sensible. So hopefully they get some consistency there. I'd like to see this thing resolved. Who wins and who loses. I just hope to say that everybody wins in a way, hopefully it just goes over without anybody getting too upset. and everybody's feelings don't get hurt, and we can get back to racing altogether. Because I don't think there's like an anti competition issue here. I don't think teams are trying to hurt the sport. This is obviously still an investment for them. 2311 and Front Row obviously still want to do well and be involved, and they're still racing right now. It's not like they're not showing up, and it's not like the drivers don't depend on performing well, and the teams are still getting paid based off of their performance, and sponsors obviously still want them to do well. There's not much of an argument to say that 2311 Front Row, other teams out there are doing things to hurt the sport and the ongoing legal battle and all of that's just not, that's not feasible. But anyway, I'm rambling too much about that. I could go on all day about just the frustrations of NASCAR, man, sometimes, but love the sport, not going anywhere. I always get negative on this show, and I feel like there's times where people probably think like, why is this guy even watching at this point? I love NASCAR. I always will. It's that thing, like it's a family member at this point to me. Like I'll never dislike it. I'll never run away from it. I'm never one of those people that says they're going to stop watching every week and then they turn the TV on Sundays. I'm never doing that. Like I absolutely love it. Wearing the hat, I wear it all the time. Daytona 500, best race in the world. We got to make it great again. But just wanted that public service announcement out there, because I think there's a lot of times where I get pointed at as probably the negative one, and I am negative, but I think it's fair, and it's out of a place of love. I'll say that it's not something that I am still watching on Sundays. I do still love it. I really do enjoy it, and always will. So I'm never going anywhere. But speaking of not going anywhere, the sport rolls on for race number 4 this weekend in Phoenix. Um, I always kind of like this race. I think it's kind of fun to get a preview. I like that Phoenix. I like whatever championship race we end up going to. It sounds like NASCAR's moving on in 2026 from Phoenix. We're finally going to see a different final race, which we'll see what happens to the playoffs, if the final race even matters the same as it used to. Who knows? We got a lot of questions to answer there. Um, but anyway, we're going to Phoenix. I like when this race is early in the year because it's a preview for the championship at the end. So kind of like an appetizer for it. Um, do I think necessarily whoever wins this race in the spring is going to be the winner in the fall? No, because teams learn so much throughout the season. What you know by the middle of the summer can even change by the end of the year. It can turn on a dime a lot of times, week to week, on teams finding speed or improving something, or just gaining on their car or their setup. So again, just fun to get to look at it. Is it worth a whole lot in terms of value for the championship? Not massively. Teams do so much sim time and stuff now. It'll just be that. But anyway, this is where the championship race is at the end of the year, in case you're wondering. We do come back to Phoenix in November. We're coming there this weekend here for week number 4 on the NASCAR season. Couple things to note: the option tire, for those of you that have followed along with NASCAR here last year, they've tried coming out with a tire that's a little bit softer than the normal race tire. So there's actually 2 different tires this weekend, not to make things even more confusing for those of you if you're a new fan. I do think these tires have like white lettering on them, or red or something like that, compared to the yellow that is the normal Goodyear logo. So um, pay close attention to that on Sunday. If a tire looks like it's a different color in a way, that's because it probably is. But NASCAR's intent there is, if you make a really, really soft tire, and a soft tire is going to fall apart quick, and but it's going to be faster too, is the trade-off. So you get like short bursts of speed, but they don't last very long. So the intent there is to get teams to try and use those to gauge track position. You only get 2 sets throughout the race. Um, so how you use them, when you use them, all a part of the strategy. Is it worth using them? Um, we'll see. Some of that right now, Goodyear's still working on the option tire and making it a massive advantage, where the first time they tried it last year, I think at Wilkesboro for the All-Star race, it didn't really give teams a whole lot of an advantage. It was pretty comparable to the regular tire. So there was no sense in trying it and hurting your day. Um, I think they've gained on it though quite a bit. And so I think this weekend I expect that tire to come into play a little bit more. I think Goodyear as a whole has really kind of figured their tires out a little bit here, even last weekend at COTA. But so that's coming into Phoenix this weekend. I do think that's going to help the racing a little bit, just because you're going to have guys on that option tire that get stuck out on a green flag run, can't get to pit road. They're going to lose a lot of time. You're going to have guys that get on those tires on a green flag stop on the option tire, blow by the guys that are on the regular tires, hopefully. So you're going to have a little bit of coming and going, I guess, in terms of throughout the race, guys fluctuating in position just because of that. Um, so again, hopefully that's what we get to see because that's Goodyear's intent. That's NASCAR's intent in doing this. Um, do I love it? Not necessarily. I think it's kind of a gimmicky thing, but this next gen car needs help on these flatter racetracks like this. So if we're not going to change the car, you got to change the tire, and so this is definitely the next best thing in my opinion. Someday I'm going to stop saying I want the car to change because they're just not going to change it, and I'll stop. But today's not that day quite yet. I wish we'd change the car. We're not going to. The tire is going to make things better. So I do look for that to be a little bit of a tick up for Phoenix because it's definitely a track that gets quite a bit of criticism in terms of putting on boring races. Guys can't pass, things like that. Hopefully, this is a step in the right direction. But anyway, really quick, I want to wrap this up here because I'm hopefully not boring everybody to death. This has actually been a little bit better than I thought. I feel like I'm doing okay at least, but I want feedback too when this is over. But anyway, gonna make a quick pick. We'll get you out of here. Enjoy the race this weekend. We'll be back at full strength next weekend. But going into Phoenix this weekend, I think it's Ryan Blaney's turn. The guy is really good at Phoenix. He was good there last fall, just not quite good enough to beat Joey Logano and win back-to-back championships. And I think the Fords are just fast at places like this right now. One thing I would note is I do think Toyota's finding a little something. So I do look for them to have a good weekend as well. But Ryan Blaney's my pick. I just think he's been a good driver already most of the year. Yeah, not no fault of his own. He's been in position just about every week so far. About COTA, I guess Penske was bad, but I digress. Ryan Blaney's turn. Ford's back. Penske's back on top. Had to do a little bit of a homer pick for my boy Wyatt. I'll pick for him. He's picking Chase Elliott again. Uh, but again, thanks everybody for listening. This is Speeding in the Bits, episode 15, solo edition. Please give me feedback. Hopefully it's kind of positive. If it's not, I'll take the negative too. It's how we get better. But appreciate you all listening every week. This is a blast for me. It's definitely one of the highlights to get to come and do this as a hobby. So shout out Wyatt. Hope everything's going well back at home. But everybody else, have a good night. We'll talk to you next week.